Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is May 18, 2022. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with Cait Jones. Is that the correct way to say it?
Yeah, exactly. Cait Jones.
Cait, where are you calling in from?
I'm calling in from Queens, New York City, Sunnyside.
How cool is that? And the first question is, what is the best thing for a human being?
The best thing for a human being to be or just anything? Hmm. Art. The easy answer is art. I think that is the best thing we create. I think that is the best thing to experience. And yeah, art in all its forms.
I love that word. What's your favorite form of information? How it comes into you?
Mm. I'm a visual thinker.
Yeah.
So I process things first visually. Um, that's where I find most of my peace. I was just traveling in France for a month and I was touring. And for me, like the place where I found meditation was just in museums. So that visual is definitely my primary intake and the thing that brings me the most joy, but very quickly followed by auditory. I obviously love music.
Yeah. That's heavy because the neuroscientists sort of say that visual is the most dominant sense. But if you say before we go into all that, let's do the through line because this will be a fun little divert if we can. Why do you think humans collect or gather information?
Interesting. Um, Let me think about that. Why do we collect information? Uh, well, I think there's a intense desire in humans to have a sense of permanence, right?
Yeah.
To feel like we have something to share with the next generation, to have some sort of impact into the future that is pretty indeterminate, really, because we're not here for very long. We don't know how long we'll be here. So I think we collect information to share information. And there is this sense of legacy that comes with that.
Really good. Is this need or want to collect information more innate or more invented?
Mm, that's a bit of a nature nurture question, isn't it? I I think it's some of both. I think I stand in the middle there because, coming from my background with, art history and studying art, there's always been this impulse in humans to leave a mark, right? I mean, we have cave paintings dating back a really long time, and there's always been this desire to share some sort of information, right? To leave some sort of impact. At the same time, I think there's been an investment in growing that, right? And how that is recorded has just developed more and more and more, right? To the point that something like what we're doing right now is, conversations are being recorded and our social media is being recorded, so even minute interactions between family members or strangers. So I think that it has intensified, but there's also it comes from an innate desire.
Yeah,
Or
very good.
Mhm.
Yeah, no, that was good. Do thoughts create emotions?
Do thoughts create emotions? Hmm. Oh, these are good questions.
Thanks.
I love this. I love these conversations. Oh, we're getting right in. We're getting right in. Okay. Do thoughts create emotions? Yes. And I think emotions also create thoughts.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, I mean, I guess to connect it back to art, which to me is the foundation of who I am in so many ways. Um, I think the best thing that comes out of art is that it makes you feel.
Yeah.
That is the best compliment you could give an artist, whether you hate their work or you love their work, you are connected to it by a sense of feel like, "Whoa, that gave me an emotion. I laughed, I was annoyed, I was happy, I was sad," right? To feel something. So, um, yes, and those thoughts come from input, whether it's a sound or, right, something bouncing around in your head.
Yeah. Well, we're going to get into all this deeper. Let's carry on. Is thinking more innate or more invented?
Is thinking more innate or more invented? Hmm. Uh, okay, I think this one also both, but I do believe that the thinking has more of an invention bent to it,
Yeah.
that we are taught ways to think,
Yeah.
and the people around us teach us how to think, that there's a lot more, especially in the world that I have known, there's been a lot more, uh yeah, teaching about how to think. And I believe there are a lot of people who, in terms, I think I'm thinking in terms of critical thinking about
Yeah.
thinking. There are a lot of people who choose not to do that, who desire to be told exactly what they need to think, right? So instead of picking something apart, it's more like I want to follow what somebody else's set of beliefs is. And that's just easier for me because of whatever set of circumstances.
Yeah. Fill in the blank, Kate. I don't know what I think until I.
I don't know what I think until I've said it out loud.
Really good. That's exactly the question's rooted. McLuhan says, I don't know what I think until I say it. Joan Didion says, I don't know what I think until I write it. Till I say it out loud. Beautiful. Can humans think without language?
Ooh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, Going back to the earlier question of emotions being connected to thoughts, um, certainly, a human without speech still has emotions, and we know that through many examples of differently abled people, right? They still have emotions, they still have thoughts. Maybe they're nonverbal, but yes, yes is the answer.
Chomsky says a language is not just words, it's culture, tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. What do you do when language doesn't work, when language breaks down?
That to me is the power of art. And
Yeah,
that is the power of music, that is the power
yeah,
of dancing, that is the power of visual art. Um, it's something that can be experienced and appreciated beyond language. I also swing dance for fun. It's not a profession of mine, and gone all over the world swing dancing, and it has so much power when you go into South Korea, and most people don't speak English. I didn't take time to learn Korean, and I can still have a conversation through dance. And
yeah.
that is so exciting that we can connect on this beautiful art form born in Harlem in, a
No.
country very far away from its roots.
Born
Um,
in Harlem, that is so cool just to say that.
it
This is
is, it is.
the tuba throat singers. I love the tuba throat singers. The guy they sing 3 voices at once. Have you heard
Yeah.
these guys?
Yeah,
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 you know
yeah.
what they okay, they sing about 3 things: their boots, snow, and their horses. But when you listen to it, it's like, "This thing's putting me in some transcendental state," and that's all they're saying. So it communicates, it's like poetry can communicate, more than it's understood. you know?
Absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely, and I love that open to interpretation-ness, right? Like,
exactly.
when you have that, I mean, somebody can find something really moving to tears that
Yeah,
somebody else finds sort of funny or right? I
right.
mean, there's so many different things you can pick out of it, and I just love that we can connect through that.
Yeah. Your observations of humans in general, I know it's both. Are we more feeling beings or more thinking beings?
Hmm. Feeling.
Yeah,
I think a lot of our thinking comes from feelings.
yeah,
And a lot of that, there takes a lot of self-awareness to be in touch with that. So I can see how a lot of people would be more focused on the thinking part, but I believe it always comes from feeling.
yeah. Two questions from Alan Turing, 1950. Is thinking a function of the soul?
Hmm. Is thinking a function of the soul? Well, uh, I guess this gets into more what's the word for it? Woo-woo, the more woo-woo sensibility.
Good word.
Um, uh, 'Cause I think the soul, is something I've thought about a lot, right? Is there this other thing that is separate from our body? That's kind of how I think about the soul, this deeper part of ourselves that is nestled into the corporeal being, but can exist outside of it. The question again, I'm
Is
picking this apart.
thinking a function of the soul?
So by that definition, yes.
Yeah,
Um, because in that sense, the soul is the more right is the force within the body that is moving through, and not the thing that kind of rots when we die. So
yeah.
yes, yes, it is.
The second Turing question is can machines think?
I I believe we're getting there. I certainly have not been involved in robotics or but I am an avid podcast listener, and I have heard some wild stories about people, investigative journalists going on journeys with um, robot therapists and conversing with them, sort of training them, asking them questions, the robots doing research on their own and coming back. So yes, I believe that they can, and that sentience will continue to grow as we cultivate it.
Kate, do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
Happiness.
This question actually touches on what you just were talking about. Does the brain more detect consciousness or create consciousness? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're detecting it, or are we creating
Oh, that's a matrix question, isn't it? That's
it?
where my mind goes immediately.
It also touches on what you were when you were discussing the soul being like it could live on after the meat of the body dies.
Right.
So, I don't know if soul is consciousness. Again, these are all just words, and we think we can agree on what the words mean. Like Lily
Mhm.
Tomlin says, reality is just a collective hunch. So we're just like trying to use words that we collectively think we mean the same. So, I mean, again, it's a stupid question because the brain more detect consciousness or create it. Like, well, it's probably both, but the funny thing about my questions, a couple of these at the beginning with more is this woman said about 2 months ago, she goes, the use of the word more in your question doesn't function, which is great because I'm about totally digging into what the question is besides your answer. Like, I mean, it's more like we're just trying to figure out what these words, how they shape our behavior.
Right, right.
So you think it's bubbling away and we're detecting it, or is consciousness we're creating it?
Wow. I'm going to go with my instinct on this one. I guess this is not something I've ever really clarified, so I'm glad you're asking it. But my instinct is that it is bubbling away and we're detecting it.
Yeah.
And I say that because we, in general, I see a tree, you see a tree, or I feel the tree, you feel the tree in the same place. So there is a sense of some sort of consistency. But, then you look at somebody with color blindness or, I mean, there's so many ways to see it the other side. But I'll stick to my guns on that one.
I like it. And that's exactly what I'm seeking in this conversation is your instinct, your hunch, your feeling. Again, this one is similar. What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
I'm going to go with, for me, is thought. I
Yeah.
know maybe that's not the scientific answer, but to us, we can only process as quickly as we can process, right? So
Yeah.
it's sort of irrelevant whether something's technically faster if we can't process that thing being faster.
Yeah. There's no right or wrong answers to any of these questions, but Cait, that one you got right. Thank you. So Audre Lorde, the great poet, said, "You can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools." Yvonne Rainer said, "You can if you expose the tools." What new tool do you suggest? Just to set up in a little more context too, again, it's like just because I throw these cute quotes before the question doesn't mean you have to apply the quote. And the fact that I use the word new and I use the word tool, it doesn't have to be new and it doesn't have to be a tangible tool. So, again, you put them in the context you want. So,
Okay.
yeah, she says you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. What new tool do you suggest? What tool do you gravitate towards?
The tools of intuition
Yeah.
and knowing oneself. I know there's a word for that, but I'm going to go with.
That's really good. Both those
Mhm.
were amazing. What new toy do you suggest?
Ooh. Spontaneity.
Oh my God, that's a good one. Yeah, I have a great line I learned many years ago. I'm trying to get more control over my spontaneity.
That's great.
What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
Oof. Um, Big one is the future of the planet,
Yeah.
climate change. And then a lot of the time that's realized in worrying about silly things like who am I going to hire on base on Saturday?
That is cool. You got to meet my wife. She's a jazz singer too. You guys got a lot.
Wow, awesome.
So Marshall McLuhan learned from the poet Ezra Pound that artists are the antenna of the race. And by artists, I mean jazz singers, painters,
Right.
illustrators, everything, all the arts. Antennas of the race, meaning they're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions so that we can learn to cope with what we don't like about these inventions. So I ask you the same question Marshall struggled with his whole career. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
Mm. I think people are afraid of emotions,
Yeah.
and they're afraid to feel for many numbers of reasons, but it's often more comfortable, like we talked about before, to have somebody tell you what to think and what to feel than
Yeah.
to know yourself and to face those things inside of you. And a lot of the time, artists expose that, and that can be very, very uncomfortable for people,
Yeah.
because the predictability makes them feel like they're in control,
Yeah.
and the reality is that they're not.
Do artists have moral obligation?
Only to their own set of morals.
Wow. That's amazing. Really well done. Are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
Mm. I would say old ideas. Um, I am the most inspired by people who were unafraid to reinvent themselves. Um, Picasso, notoriously not a great guy, but I can separate his art from his person.
Yeah.
And I love how he just kept reinventing what he did. I there was just no phase that was unexplored, no medium unexplored. And to me, that's really inspiring. And I have fear, in my visual art and also in jazz, of stagnating, right? Just kind of like, oh, wow, this album sounds exactly like the one she did 5 years ago. That's boring to me. Yeah, recycling old ideas, that's more of a fear.
Yeah, that was great bringing up Picasso because one of my favorites is the German government official is touring the studios of artists in Paris, and they walk into Picasso's studio, and he's finishing up Guernica.
Mm.
And the guy goes, "Did you do that?" And Picasso goes, "No, you did."
Amazing.
That is
Amazing. The shade.
Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever or one of them?
Oh, okay. Um, all right. One of my very early memories is that I remember what it felt like to be on my dad's back, to be small enough that he was carrying me. There was this pizzeria. I grew up on the Upper West Side. There's this pizzeria, it's still there, called VNT's. And I have this distinct memory one night going there, getting pizza, coming home just really tired, and my dad putting me on his back and then falling asleep. And, the magic of a kid is like waking up in your bed, like, whoa, how did I get here? Um, so yeah, and that
Amazing.
reference for size. Mhm.
Yeah, amazing because 90% of people tell me a visual memory, and you're talking about visual art and auditory art, and then back to the feel. Yours was a tactile, the
Mm,
feeling of being on your dad's bed. That was great. Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
mm. A blessing. I love my memories. Again, it's in between, right? Because I do wonder sometimes, especially I'm still quite young, obviously, but as I get older, I notice that certain memories start to change or I remember things differently. And as I observe that more and more, I'm like, "Oh, wow. Yeah, I can see how confusing this can be and hope that I remember things the right way." Is there a right way? That's another question. I don't know that there necessarily is. But what I appreciate and why I say that it's more of a gift is that, again, conjuring so many emotions, it can bring memories can bring so much joy.
Yeah.
They can also bring sadness, but they just are these like benchmarks of feeling in your life. And to me, that is the most valuable thing that we hold on to.
Beautiful. Can you tell me within your immediate family and then outside your immediate family, someone who had an impact on you was sort of like a role model, And what specifically, just briefly, was that impact?
Mm. My mom is a huge one. She was an artist as well. She, my both of my parents worked 9 to 5 day jobs, and I am grateful to both of them for drilling it into my sister and I that we should follow our hearts and pursue whatever makes us happy. My dad would always say, the catchphrase is like, work you'll never work a day in your life if you're doing what you love. Um, which I wouldn't say is necessarily true. I still have to deal with a lot of admin as a musician. That's not very fun. But overall, I own my hours, and that is such a joy to me. And my mom was really very much the same. She had a wealth of relationships and friends. She collected interesting people, which was very inspiring. She took us to parties when we were very young. So I was socialized from a young age around a lot of different kinds of people and artists. Um, she encouraged us in art. I took singing lessons. She took me to life drawing when I was 13 was the first time. And of course, as a 13-year-old, to see like naked people, naked adults and draw them was like, whoa. But I'm so grateful she did that, right? I mean, it
Yeah.
desensitized me to it, and then I could really start to appreciate from a young age, like, oh, the human body is so beautiful,
Yeah.
right? In all these different ways. Um, so yeah, she exposed me to art. She was a poet. She's the reason I know Flash. She was a very dear friend of Flash's as well. So she has been a huge role model in my life. Unfortunately, she's gone, but she continues to inspire me and um, influence me in all the ways that she taught me how to live and appreciate life.
Beautiful. That was well done. Outside your immediate family, someone who had an impact on you.
Mm. I'd say my babysitter growing up.
Nice.
She
What'd you get
she
from the
uh
babies?
she lives she still lives in the building that we grew up in, and she's one of those people that has had the craziest only in New York kind of lives. Grew up in New York in the 70s and 80s. And her parents were total hippies. They babysat us when we were very young. Her father painted frescoes all in the interior of their New York City, one bedroom New York City apartment. Um, and in so many ways, she taught me about her mistakes, and I learned through her how not to be. She became addicted to drugs quite young, and I needed no other lesson in, wow, I don't wanna go down that path. Um, but, she just lived big and and continues to be just unafraid to take risks, to follow her heart, and yeah, was a huge influence both in how not to be and then, how to be.
Yeah, it sounds like what Alice Walker said about her mother. She said, "Yes, mother, I can see you are flawed. You have not hidden it. That is your greatest gift to me."
Mm, yeah.
Really, really beautiful. That was well put. Did your parents raise you a particular religion?
No, not at all. We were exposed to it. I actually distinctly have a memory in 6th grade. I had an amazing humanities teacher, and she took the entire class. When we had a unit on religion, we went to a Buddhist temple, we went to a synagogue, we went to a church, and we experienced all of these, led through different kinds of religious practice. I had a very religious aunt growing up, and my parents, I was talking about this with a friend yesterday, my parents trusted, us to go down there 1 month out of the summer for several years, where she inundated us with church every Sunday and Wednesday, and we had the choice. Um, and I came to the conclusion that religion really was not for me pretty quickly, and have continued, to again have a little bit of my own sort of woo-woo spirituality, but no religion.
Do you pray?
No.
If God exists, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
That all the religions had it wrong.
That's good.
Uh,
Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
hmm. I I really think a lot of evil comes from people's circumstances and um torment in their lives or the lives of those before them. Certainly generational trauma I believe in, and has had a very strong effect on many people. Um so yeah, I guess it in some ways it works through people. I think that everyone does have some good in them, is what I like to believe. I am definitely an
Yeah.
optimist in that way. Um, but it's certainly not something I think can just be struck out, and like
Yeah.
the evil can just be removed. Maybe with a really good therapist and the aid of you know lots of hard personal work.
Follow-up question goes right along with it. How do you advise people to deal with an enemy? And I'm going to set up with a few modern thinkers' thoughts. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from The Mob and the Samurais, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thoughts. The basic question, Cait, is how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
I think that a lot of the time, our enemies inhabit factors about ourselves that we don't like.
Yeah.
So to ignore that person, to not acknowledge that they exist, I don't think really works. They're not going
Yeah.
to go away. They're not going to stop existing. Um, and there's an evaluation I think that needs to happen of like, okay, well, what is it about this person that it really bothers me, you know? Um, my advice to people, I'm definitely a kill 'em with kindness person.
Yeah.
Um, I have this joke with my friends of, buy my album. It's kind of a like, you're really difficult and you make weird comments. Maybe, I don't like you, but I would never want you to know it. And I'm
Yeah.
not, gonna waste time worrying about what you think about me, as much as possible. And when that comes up, I try and investigate my own feelings around it. Um, but yeah, I think being cruel to them or, reflecting back what they give you, it only creates more, right? So it's just not worth it to me. Yeah, to get cutthroat or mean,
Yeah.
you know.
Kindness is the way. Really good. So you brought up this tree metaphor earlier. You must have ESP. James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin about 100 years ago. and he basically checked out. He said, "This is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree?" Years later, Faulkner said, "Sometimes the best journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?"
Mm. Because we always have a desire to see the world through other people's perspective. We're always caught in our own. And it'd be really cool if I could step outside and see that tree through your eyes. But art allows us to do that. And
Yeah.
that's why we see the play. That's why we watch the movie, to see that different angle of the tree and how somebody else feels about it.
What was the motive of the cave artist? Your hunch.
To leave their mark.
Yeah. So, Cait, why don't you walk us through, please, sort of just briefly, the tipping points where you decided to be an illustrator and the tipping point where you decided to be a singer, to pursue those. Who are you growing up that's going, "I can do that," or just, any tipping point, like what did you go to college to study, or did you go to college and that sort of like mini history of how you got to that.
Yeah. So I'd say a big transition point for me was high school. Um, I I got very swept up in the competition that is New York City high schools.
Yeah.
I took the test. I wanted to go to Stuyvesant because that's the best one, and I needed to be at the best school to be the best. I was very straight A student, obsessed about my grades. Um, and I auditioned for LaGuardia, and for the art department. I didn't get into Stuyvesant, but I did get into LaGuardia, and I sobbed. I was so upset, and my mom was like, "But you got into the arts high school. You should be so proud of yourself." And that, of course, I ended up choosing that. I ended up going to LaGuardia, and uh, yeah, and then it was we had 10 periods of like 40 minutes a day, and 4 of those were art classes. So I was doing art all day, every single day, and rapidly learning a lot. And by the end of 4 years of that, I wasn't sick of it. I still really loved it. And then in college, I was like, well, there's all these things I want to pursue. I went to Skidmore College with a liberal arts school. But I ended up being an art major again because I was like, but there's so much still I want to explore here. I love it. I love it so much. Um,
But hold on one second. You mentioned art history earlier. Are you studying art history more than making art, or are you studying more making art? Or
Making art. Yeah, I did
what
take
medium? What medium were you gravitating towards?
so I started out with drawing, of course, and then got really into watercolor. Then I
Right.
rebelled against that because that was my mom's medium and I had to be different, because I was a teenager. Um, and so I focused in multimedia drawing. So I was using um, chalk pastels and charcoal. I was doing really big drawings because we had tons of space in the studios. So my
Yeah.
senior thesis was like 8-foot drawings. Um, and now I also got really into ballpoint pen drawing, which I still do. I find it as
Nice.
a medium really easy to travel with, which
Yeah.
is how I started with ballpoint pen. Um, and I do some crow quill, which is kind of that old fashioned like dip ink pen
That pink.
as
Yeah.
well. Mhm.
But who are you seeing early? Because it's evident that your mom's influence on you because she's making it in front of you. But they're also taking you to art museums. Who, just two or three artists that you went, that's what I want to do. That like
Mm.
sort of tipping points, like just, you
Yeah.
know,
Oh, good question.
I know there's lots, but
Oh,
just a
of
couple
course,
off
of
the top of
course.
your head. Yeah.
So I remember, as a kid, I loved Shrek by William Steig,
Right.
and I remember taking the book and tracing every single page to make my own Shrek book, which I
Yes.
still have. Um, then I also remember there was a book of, Raphael's paintings,
Yeah.
and that was in high school. I was obsessed with it.
Yeah.
Um, it's funny because I remember going to the Met as a kid on a field trip and walking through the modern art section where there was lots of Picasso and Jackson Pollock, and I hated it. I hated it, and I feel so differently now, but it's always funny to me knowing that I had this really strong reaction as I must have been
Well,
9.
I think just to psychoanalyze it, it's because you thought the abstract art is bullshit. In a way it is, and that's what's good about it. But again, that was great. Not so we'll get back into all that. And I'm just curious, the same in singing. So
Mm,
your parents are having like hootenannies, or you're having, people sing around you. Besides those people, who at the point you're like, I wanna do that. Who are you
mm,
hearing it, or what's the tipping point? To
yeah.
be a person who has a band?
Right, right. Um, so, uh, I I wanted to pursue musical theater. My stepdad is a librettist. He writes book and lyrics for musicals. So I was around it. Um, I didn't get into any musicals in high school because I was competing against people on Broadway. Literally, my classmates were on Broadway, so I had no chance. Um, But then in college, I got into a bunch of shows, realized it really wasn't for me, and then auditioned for the jazz band. Um, I'd say a tipping point before that was my mom handing me Ella Fitzgerald,
Yeah,
because I was listening to all the musical theater, and I, in high school, would put on makeup, do my hair, play around with outfits, and then sing along, like lip sync along to Ella Fitzgerald and dance in the mirror, which to me is so funny because it was the secret, quiet, in my room thing, which is my job now. So I look at that moment, I think about like that was my secret thing that I did only for me, and now that's my job. Um, but the like, how did I get this being a
yeah,
career was a swing dancer I knew took me to a jam session.
yeah,
And, as I got into swing dancing, I actually started to see people who were playing music as a job.
yeah,
And I really had not been around that at all in my life. And to see people practically doing it was like, oh, this is a viable career.
yep,
And there's a actual path of like, I can go to these jam sessions. And so I went, it was terrifying. It was the scariest thing I'd ever done. And I was like, well, if it is that scary, then it must really matter, and I have to go back every single week. And so I did. I went back to that jam session. I think I missed like 3 Tuesdays, and I went back every single week for a year, and by the end of that year, I got offered my first gig.
how cool. We'll get more into that. That was really good intro to all that. So, a screenwriting teacher told me great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Stanley Kubrick says the opposite. Great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the. What role does intention play in your creative process, whether you're illustrating or singing?
Mm,
And I mean, you could separate them, whatever, but
right, right. I think, intention has a huge influence. For me, when I'm singing is storytelling, And I really lose interest in watching a vocalist when I feel that they are disconnected from the story. Um, that's what excites me about what I do. I love the American Songbook because the words, the stories are so good. The lyrics are so good. They are so sophisticated. It is poetry. It is magical, and I feel really lucky to get to continue that tradition.
Yeah.
I also write lyrics, so I've started to write my own songs in that vein. Um, in art, I certainly learned in a very traditional sense of if you want that leg to look like it's coming forward in the painting, then you need to be thinking this leg is in front of the other one. Not only, putting heavier lines, but you need to be thinking it. Um, but as I've played around with some more abstract work, I think with visual art, because it's so up to interpretation, I find it so unnecessary for there to be explanations for any of it.
Yeah.
It's cool when there's a great explanation around it, but I am so happy to just take something in, If I'm drawn to it and then the concept has nothing to do with what I got out of it, it doesn't matter. And so I find it really exciting and freeing actually to make art with zero intention other than, wow, I really like how I can blend colored pencils.
It's great the spectrum from music to illustrating that you just did. In the same with Duchamp saying there's no art without an audience. How much are you thinking of your viewer when you're illustrating? How much are you thinking of your audience when you're writing your song?
Mm. For music, especially over the pandemic, I realized I need an audience. I really don't have desire to create, to sing, um, much at all unless there's an audience. And that audience could be my nephew. That audience could be very small. But I don't sing for myself. Um, with visual art, I've actually gone really the opposite direction. I did a lot of work by commission, which I was grateful to have, but felt very, um, I felt very boxed in having to fit, okay, I need to make this to suit what they want. How can I make the client happy? And lately, I have freed myself, fortunately enough, of those restrictions. And my friend and I have been getting together and just picking a theme and making art on that theme. And so I've just been creating art for the sake of the joy of creating it. And that has felt so, so, so good.
It's beautiful. And this question applies again to both. My friend in music says the three tenets are technique, theory, and taste. So, theory, you learn what chords to play, technique, you know how to play them. Taste, how does one acquire taste in both music and art, fine art, let's say? How do
Mm,
you acquire taste?
mm. That's tricky. It's the thing that I always say is the hardest or maybe impossible to teach. I remember having this realization. My mom took me to a watercolor exhibit at the American Watercolor Society in New York City. And I remember looking around at some of the paintings like, wow, this person's technique is amazing. I mean, some of them looked almost like oil paintings. The blending, the detail, and I hated them. The colors were horrible. The composition was cheesy.
Yeah,
I mean, it's something I would never want to look at, but I could appreciate, wow, they really know what they're
yeah,
doing. And to somebody else, they might look at that and think, "I have to buy this."
yeah,
So, you know, eh, could you teach taste? I don't really think so. I think
yeah.
it's something that you need to follow. You're not gonna enjoy creating it if you're trying to create it to suit somebody else's taste, right? So, ultimately, it's always gonna come back to your taste. And your taste is going to be somebody else's taste. That's inevitable. It might not be my taste, but I'm not going to tell you that you're wrong, right?
Yeah.
So I think that it's so individual, and I when I have student I have teaching I teach singing students, and when I'm teaching, I always encourage them in the direction of a lot of my heroes, but I try and give them a wealth of options of, and who are you drawn to, because you should sing the way you want to sound. It shouldn't be about what I think you should sound like, or how that taste is really their choice,
Yeah.
for better or worse.
Yeah, that was well done. Have you ever heard the Shags?
No.
Oh, you gotta seek them out.
What a
They're like
name.
the worst band in the history of the world, but you can I mean, the back of their album, it's like Bonnie Raitt, Carla Bley, Elvis Costello, and Frank Zappa. I was going, this is the greatest, most pure music ever. But it's like unlistenable music in a lot of people's minds. So, I've acquired a taste to love them. A lot of people say, it's hip to love or know who the Shags are, but it's like, oh, some people go, I don't get that. But then I was talking to this pro drummer the other day, and she was, playing the Hollywood Bowl and everything. And I says, somehow we got on to people who are really good, like you said, this watercolor person who just does it perfect. And I says, well, what do you think of Jacob Collier? Have you ever heard this guy? You
Oh,
know this?
yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
And she goes, we call that ability music, and it's like, to me, a couple of my friends love him. And I'm like, dude, I can't even go there. He doesn't have any ragged edges. I'm glad he exists and he's great at what he does. But it was similar to your reaction to that watercolor being so perfect. So knowing music, Copeland says the four ingredients are melody, harmony, rhythm, and tone color, especially in the vocal world. Because do you play an instrument too, or you're
I
just a
do. I play some tenor guitar, which is
okay,
four-string guitar.
right?
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, your main thing is singing. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so we know what melody, harmony, and rhythm is pretty much. How do you explain in layperson's terms what's tone color?
Tone color. Hmm. So the way I'd pick that one apart is there are so many ways to play a chord. Um, and the way that you can color that will change the feeling around it, right? So whether um you're adding other notes into it to change the color of that chord, or how you resolve to that chord, like what's coming before it or after it, can really change the feeling around it. So the understanding of how it functions within the music, you can really manipulate a feeling around that.
Beautiful. McLuhan says that everything we invent extends some humanness, like the knife and fork extends our teeth, clothing extends our skin, even non-tangible like religion or philosophy could be an extension of consciousness. What is the writing that the drawing utensil extend for you? Whether it's a pencil or a pen or like you said, you use ballpoint pen, just the drawing utensil. What humanness does it extend?
The subconscious.
Yeah.
Yeah, I am really influenced by surrealism. I love it so much. I love art's ability to explore the unseen. And the unseen to me is the subconscious, is that which is floating beneath the surface of what the reality that we share is. Um, and that's why I find it so exciting, especially to, sit down, right, without intention, and to see something that comes out on the page when you're doodling or playing around, right? You're not working from observation necessarily, or maybe you are taking pieces of observation and manipulating them. Um, and it just yeah, that's fascinating. You see so much, right? You can see, like, looking through my old sketchbooks, I mean, I can tell the mind state I was in. I remember it, I remember the moment that I made it, but then you can also see by heaviness of the lines or, there's a clear emotion in those pieces. So, yeah.
And you said you cut out a little there. Did you say pointillism?
No, surrealism.
Surrealism, great, because I heard ism and I thought, yeah, it's
Yeah, I
surrealism,
appreciate what Seurat did, but I do not have that patience, so
right. But that's amazing because, surrealism is the art form that had the biggest impact on me in studying art in
Mm,
college too, and Dada and surrealism. And then I learned years later that it was a reaction to war. And it's like, I hate that. I'm a pacifist. I don't want my favorite art form to happen because of war, you know? And so, wow, that's it's just amazing where the origins of these things we gravitate towards, you know.
right, right.
So this is goes along with learning. Michael Apted, the great filmmaker, I spoke with him 40 years ago, and I said, "Why do rock video editors feel so obliged to edit fast?" He says, "Because we've learned to take in information faster." Most people don't know that Abel Gance invented rapid montage in 1922, but it really flourished when MTV started in the 80s, to the point where Marty Scorsese says, "I cut my films faster because of MTV." So I ask you a question with a bias, sorry, is can humans literally learn to take in information faster, or are we just brainwashed to believe we can?
Mm. I I believe that we can take in information faster because we are required to hold on to less of it. The internet is this huge brain. We don't have to remember little details of, "Oh, who was in that band?" I can look it up.
Yeah,
What was that movie called? I can look it up. So we just
yeah,
have this access to this, I mean, it's the encyclopedia on steroids, right? I mean,
yeah,
it's literally every bit of information you could want and don't want. And so then there's all this space now for us to take in other things. Um, and I think that's part of why we're processing it faster because we have access to so much and we don't have to hold on to it.
exactly. And the hidden question there is it literally possible for humans to multitask?
Mm, I think so. I think that it is. For example, when I am drawing, I love to listen to podcasts. I find that when I'm listening to the podcast, my critical brain is taken away from the process of the creating art, and my intuitive brain is making the art. So I'm not really thinking about, oh, what should go here? Or I don't like how this looks. Maybe I should start over. I have no space because I'm listening to some, heady stuff about law or, I like to get really like into heady things so that, but I just can't. There's no mental space for me to do anything but literally just art. Right. So then I am multitasking. I view it as multitasking because the 2 different parts of my brain are happily occupied, and I fall into this kind of meditative state, and I come out of it like, "Oh, I think I understand the Constitution better, and look at this thing that I made."
Well, that's really interesting, especially when it comes to, let's say, being a jazz singer and improvising, which is an essential part of jazz. Is so many of the heavy musicians I've talked to is say, don't think, you know. Though Thelonious Monk says music is math. Now, when you think of Thelonious Monk, it's mathematical to a point, but I love my friend said, Thelonious Monk heard all the same notes Charlie Parker heard, but he only decided to play them. So, he broke it down, but how much is he thinking? So again, if you can do that while you're drawing, but when you're singing in a jazz setting, there's a structure to the song, but then there's parts where there isn't structure. What does your brain do when there isn't a structure? How do you let go of thinking or incorporate it? How do you navigate that?
Mm. Well, to me, because I'm singing from the uh, repertoire of the American Songbook, I don't get into free jazz or anything that's completely without structure. Um, I so there floating underneath me, there's always kind of there's a set of chords. There's an AABA or two halves, whatever, however the song form is.
Yeah.
I agree the ideal is to be in flow state, and when I
Yes.
hire the right musicians, I completely trust them, and when I have that trust, I feel safe to take risks, which
Yeah.
means that I go into flow state very quickly because I feel like I'm safe here. If I do something that sounds bad or that is wrong, which, is arguably doesn't exist, right? It's like you can always resolve it, or maybe somebody, right? It's a taste thing. Maybe somebody's like, whoa, that was cool. And I think it sounded horrible, but, I'm inside my head and they're outside. So totally different interpretations of the same thing. Um, so that's the ideal, is to be in that flow state where, to me, I I'm improvising and I'm telling the story, and I get to just get lost in the emotion of it.
Yeah.
I'm picturing something, and then I'm listening to the people around me and responding. It just becomes a conversation. Um,
Yeah,
so
listening's the key word there. Because
Mhm.
Monk also says there are no wrong notes. Any comment?
Agreed. I agree.
That's
I agree. And I say this to my students a lot is, so much of the comfort in a performer is their confidence. If somebody is singing the most beautiful, you close your eyes and you're like, "Wow, they sound so beautiful." But then you watch them and they look uncomfortable. You'll hate it. You just won't, it's like, I mean, they sound pretty, but ooh, wow, I should really keep my eyes closed or look away, because they are not owning that space. They don't feel safe being there, which makes me feel unsafe watching them. But maybe, the opposite, right? Somebody goes up there and they're not very good, but they're confident and they're telling the story and they feel it so much they hit some sour notes, but you're there with them because they're owning it, You're like, "All right, well, they don't sound perfect," but that rawness that you're talking about, I would rather the singer that hits some wrong notes because they felt them so much than the one who's so technically perfect and completely emotionless, other than, maybe being kind of uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's interesting because Ruth Draper, she said the key is to bring the audience up into the stage and into the scene with you. It is they who give you more than you give them in way of imagination and creative power. How do you accomplish that?
Mm,
Like, it
well,
sounds really good, but it's like, wow.
and that is, certainly in the last couple of years, as I've come more wholly into myself, into my confidence, into feeling safe, owning the space and being in flow state. That's what I'm really going for, is how can I get to that place where I can really bring people into this story and along the journey. And it's, none of it's easy. It's a lifetime pursuit. That's
Yeah,
why people pursue jazz for an entire life, because there's
yeah,
always more to learn. There's always more to build on, and um, perfect isn't the right word, but to hone. There's more skills to and more stories to tell, right? With life experience, there are certain songs I don't even touch. I'm like, not there yet. I don't know what that feels like, but I can't wait until I do. I can't wait until I can sing that song. So, yeah.
that was beautiful. And Miles Davis spoke of the space between notes. How do you determine the space between notes?
Mm, the space between notes. So, speaking of lifetime pursuits with jazz, we are uh really, I think the study of jazz in a lifelong sense is understanding time. And the
Yeah.
more you try and understand time, the more abstract time becomes. Because you realize that you can sit down with a metronome and you can feel time exactly to the metronome. But then when you're in a group of people, the bass player is still going to feel it differently. So, how can you find people who feel time the way you feel time? Like when I have there's a specific combination I'm thinking of this bass player and piano player that I play with. They've been playing together a really long time. They are masters of accompaniment. And when I play with them, it a fast song feels so spacious. I have so much time. And I'm like, "Did I count this in too slow?" I even have those thoughts of like, "Wow, I must have counted this in really slow." But then I'm tapping my foot, when they're soloing, and I'm like, "No, this is really fast." But
Yeah.
they make it feel so spacious versus maybe somebody else I hire who's just rushing it or they're not clicking quite right. Whatever the combination of things is, they're not feeling it in that spacious way, and it feels rushed and I feel like I have no time at all. So that space between notes, I think is in there, right? Is in
Yeah.
something that could technically be the same tempo, but how people feel it and how they feel it together in conversation. The more advanced you get, the more particular you are about like, oh, I really want this combination of people because boom, I'm in flow state so quickly.
Yeah. It's really well put. You're very articulate. What's more important, conviction or compromise?
Hmm. For me, compromise.
Dang, there's no right or wrong answers to any of these questions. Again, you got that one right. You've accomplished a lot. Rate these three elements: skill, luck, and ambition. What played the first, second, and third role?
Hmm. I would say, ambition first, um, then skill, then luck.
Very good. T.S. Eliot said poetry's outing your inner dialogue. What language is your inner dialogue in?
Ooh, I like that. What language is my inner dialogue in? Hmm. I'll go with optimism. That's the first thing that popped into my head.
It's good. It's sort of funny because you almost said it about the first minute or two of our dialogue was you said visual thinking, and then you said, well, I'm also an auditory thinking. But optimism is interesting. Did you get optimism more from the way your parents raised you or on your own?
Uh, I was definitely raised with it. My dad is a fierce a fierce optimist. Um, but as my babysitter who I mentioned said, maybe not so kindly, but also kind of truthfully, she's like, "You live in a fairy tale." You've always kinda seen things a little bit, fairy tale like. And, I was like, "Oh, I don't know if that's a nice thing to say, but uh, I think there's some truth to it, I am always seeing the bright side of situations, and to me, it gives me hope, it gives me much more joy to share. I mean, if there's anything I wanna share, it's the joy of what I do. It's for people to come see me perform and to feel, they're seeing my perspective. They're removed from their reality for a little bit, right? Like they're transported into this wonderful space, and to leave with a smile on their face. It's like, wow, I won. I succeeded. Um,
It's the Great American Songbook again. Accent the positive.
right?
Accentuate the
That's
positive.
right. That's right.
Okay, this one is like, again, a stupid question, but it's more, and it depends. But just your general feeling. Two of my film heroes say, ignore yourself, and there is no self expression. Cecil Taylor, great jazz pianist, says, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me. So is art making, singing more self expression or more you're a vehicle for whatever technology, culture, or environments are dominant? And I'm not saying so much for
Mm,
you, but your observations, you have a great extensive awareness of the arts, singing and art. Your observations of what are these people doing? Is it self-expression more? I know it's both. Is it more
mhm,
self-expression or is it more the vehicles?
mm. I would say it is more that they are a vehicle for the world that they live in, that they are processing what is around them
Yeah,
through personal experience, which is how we connect to it, right? Because if we
yeah,
say a million people died of COVID, that's a really hard thing to contextualize. But then if you know somebody personally, that really contextualizes it differently, right? So
yeah,
that's what an artist does is they take that million people and they give you the one person.
yeah. It's funny because this guy, I give the example of Ginger Baker, the great drummer from Cream. He said, "Where did you get your drum sound style from?" He says, "I was in London when they were bombing. Boom, 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 boom." So he got it from being bombed. And then the guy from Negative Land, he says, "Well, Missy Elliott said she learned how to sing from car alarms." That is like the perfect. It's like, I mean, you learned how to sing from listening to Ella. It's like that.
Did it. Yeah. I mean, it's always amazing when they harmonize. That's like magic
It
when you
is.
get some harmonizing car alarms.
Yeah. Well, Kate, this is really fun. The but really hidden question to that last question is, can art making be egoless?
Mm, absolutely.
Yeah.
It has moved very far from that direction, the second we started signing work. But for a long time, art was not signed.
Yeah.
And um, it really was about, and I love this. Elizabeth Gilbert talks about this in one of her TED Talks about the idea that the Greeks had that you are simply a vessel creating this. The creative idea is removed from you, it is gifted to you by a muse,
Yeah.
then you create the piece, and it is the product of what the muse has given you, which can be a very freeing way to think about art because then it removes you from that, like, I am good or bad based on the outcome of this. And it's
Yeah.
just, this is what I create. This is what came from the muse today. Um,
That's
so yeah.
one of McLuhan's favorite lines is, the Balinese have no word for art. They do everything as well as they can.
Mm,
It's like that was good because also Warhol says, don't worry about what people think of your art. Just keep making it. you know, which is hard because you want some acknowledgement, but so
mhm.
is perception reality?
Yes, for the individual, it is your reality.
Yeah. Why is it so difficult for humans to consider the possibility that life may be pointless? I'm not saying life is pointless, but why is it so hard for us to consider that it might be?
I think because again, I think there's kind of an obsession with legacy, right?
Yeah.
And so if we um if we pour all of our effort into something, let's say I spend all my life making all this artwork and then, it burns down in a building. It's like, well, what was the point? It's like the hope of art, right? The hope of whatever you do to have an impact in the future, to be remembered, right? And I think the idea for some that we would just at the end of it become compost. Yeah, it's like, yeah, I guess that feels pointless to
Yeah,
them.
I love this whole thing. I'd love to do a future salon with you someday with a bunch of creative people, like the obsession with legacy. That is a deep thing. It's really,
Well, it's honestly something that I guess I keep bringing it up because it's something that I really had to face. I'm like entering into that mid-career place where I'm no longer like the chance of being the like young and upcoming artist is gone.
yeah,
And so, I'm just been doing it for a while person. And I realized I had to let go of this feeling of, oh, but what about the famous? What about the legacy? Will people remember me?
yeah,
Like, is it okay to just create art? And
yeah,
maybe, like my uncle who I never met, my great uncle, my grandfather's brother, he was a amazing painter and he did beautiful drawings. And his art is treasured by our family and known by nobody else.
yeah, yeah,
And so I'm like, is that enough?
yeah,
And I think yes. Now I think yes. I think that's more than enough. I
yeah,
love his work. I never met him, and I am so honored to hang his pieces in my home. And
yeah,
so can I realize the same thing for myself, and is that enough? And I
yeah,
feel like, yes, I don't have to be I'll be dead. So,
yeah,
it's really about impacting the people that I'm with now. But I think, especially speaking to American culture, which is what I know the best, we really care about fame. We really care about legacy and holding
yeah,
on to these things. I think that's why we're so obsessed with objects because we attach all these memories to them, and then somehow creates this, oh, I was here.
yeah. Lewis Carroll says, I believe as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. Have you believed in any impossible things lately?
Mm, wow. I No, I don't think so. I hate to say no to that because I want to say yes. Um, I think of a lot of things that my dad used to have this game where he would ask us to come up with something impossible, and then he would explain a way that it was possible. And it always really annoyed my sister, which I kind of enjoyed watching them play this game. Like, "Oh, well, a human could never fly." And he was like, "Well, airplanes." And, he'd like come up with all these ways that we figured out how to fly. Um, so I guess somehow maybe that's worked its way into my head, right? Is like I don't think that things are impossible. And maybe that's part of why I ended up being an artist because I was told by a lot of people that that wasn't possible. And here I am.
Beautiful. Tell me one major element of your creativeness that stayed the same and one major element that's changed in the years you've been doing it.
Mm. So I have always had this very strong internal desire to create, like the impulse. The
Yeah,
impulse has always been there and it has always been fierce and the same.
yeah,
I was singing as soon as I could talk, says my mom.
yeah,
And I was drawing as soon as I could draw, and, that impulse has always been there. Um, what has changed is, um, my I was a really shy kid,
mm,
and this is why I gravitated towards visual art and was really scared of performing, even though it's what I wanted to do. And I have very much changed. I don't identify anymore as a shy person in any way. A lot of that was kind of I trained myself out of it. Um, and honestly worked in the food industry for a couple of years, and you just learn to interact with lots of different people in, you know, many different scenarios very quickly. Um, so yeah, so how I relate to people has really changed. And being open to that, being wanting to be the center of attention, feeling comfortable with it, feeling comfortable talking about what I do and owning being an artist. It took me a long time to even say, I, Cait Jones, am an artist,
Yeah.
because I had so much stigma against that. So the impulse was always there, but the owning of it has changed.
Really well put. You almost answered this, but I'm going to ask it anyways. Moshe Feldenkrais says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength rather than we're normally taught to overcome a weakness. Tell me a weakness you turned into a strength. And I mean, you could say the shyness into that, but if there's another one you can explain, like, don't you have another weakness? No.
Yeah, I've got plenty.
You know, I'm realizing that those two questions after 40 years are not put in the same. They should be separated a little because it's almost like I just told you that. But anyways, I'm going to ask it anyways, just
Mhm.
because there. Any weakness you've turned into a strength.
Mm. Um, let's see. Wow. I don't know why I'm struggling with this. Yes. I I had a lot of self-doubt, and I don't know where it came from. And maybe, this would be kind of tied into the shyness.
Yeah,
There was a lot of thinking that I wasn't good enough. I have an older sister, and I thought she was, you know, she could part water and walk on it and, everything. I mean, she was the golden goddess of my childhood,
yeah,
and I was her little sister. Um, and so there was just I was so, 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 so self-conscious, and I remember, when it came to humor, constantly being in my head of like, "Oh, I should I say that? Will that be funny? No, I don't think that will be funny. Oh, this will be funny. Guaranteed people will laugh. I'll say it." So there was so much censorship around,
yeah,
um, and, I think it came from this desire ultimately to be perfect, like I
yeah,
mentioned with my grades. Um, what I can say is that how I turned that into a strength, was really partially letting that go is like,
yeah,
oh, we relate to people by their being human. We relate to their flaws. We relate to them being vulnerable. And by accessing that and sharing my vulnerability, then it's so much easier for me to connect with other people, and to build relationships. But I do have this deep appreciation and understanding for somebody who is shy, for somebody who doubts themselves, right? So, it has become a strength coming from that, as I have students, um, to know the journey I went through to get to a point where I, didn't get into a single musical and now I'm a professional singer, that I can encourage my students who are in a similar position, like, "You can do this. I know the doubt that you have, and here's the push of confidence, you can do it."
yeah.
Um,
Very good. If you were walking down the street today, Cait, and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
mm, I think it's something, along those lines, right? Is like, your vulnerability is what people will love.
Yeah, it's good. These are 5 Alan Watts questions just off the top of your head in a few words. Who started it all?
Who started it all? The sun.
Are we going to make it?
Yes.
Where do we put it?
In our subconscious.
Who's cleaning it up?
The conscious.
Is it serious?
No.
You were good at that. That was good. Can you forget to die?
Ooh, I love that question. Oh, I just want that to be yes.
Yeah. Dude, you just say yes if that's what you want
Yes.
it to
Oh, I
be.
want that to be yes. Yes.
How do you find peace of mind?
Art.
Yeah.
Art, also for me, yoga, stretching, so being in your body in whatever way that is, dancing, um, but yeah, I mean, art is a very loose definition for me, so I would argue that yoga is an art form. So, yes.
I agree totally. There's a saying that you evoked at the beginning of our discussion was, if you can't say it, sing it. And if you can't sing it, dance it. Um, just a few more here. It's really been fun.
Likewise.
Which way should toilet paper come off the roll?
Oh,
Over or under?
there is no question there. It is definitely over. I feel very strongly about that.
Why?
Um, because because you see where it's coming from. When it's coming under, then, it's much more likely to, like, fall to the floor because you don't get the same grip on it. I don't know. It's funny, I had a boyfriend years ago who felt so strongly about it, and I had no opinion, but then once he explained it to me, I was like, "How could it ever be any other way?" And I am that person in other people's bathrooms who change.
Very good. If a publisher was to release your autobiography off the top of your head, what would the title be?
Well, I love puns, so it would have to be a pun. Um, well, I'm gonna go with CAIT Kate for now. It's not a pun, but that's I often say that when I'm leading the band, because it's an odd spelling. My full name is Cait Lynn, which I shortened to Kate, because as I traveled and performed, I realized Cait Lynn is very difficult to say in different languages, but Kate
Yeah.
is really easy
Oh,
across languages. So, and I love it. Cait Jones, it's just like, punchy.
really good.
Um, so yeah, but I always spell it out, and I think that would be a fun title because it is something I say all the time.
Beautiful. They want to scent the glue in the binding. What smell would it be?
Say that again?
They want to scent the glue in the binding of your autobiography. What smell would it be?
Honeysuckle.
Beautiful. The statue was built in your honor. Where would you want it displayed and what would it be made of?
I would want it in, Sunnyside. I love this neighborhood so much. Um, and I would want it to be if it's outdoors, then bronze because I love the way that bronze colors over time. If it were indoors, then I would want it to be wood.
Nice. Tell me something good you never had and you never want.
Mm. Oh, that's such a good question. Alright, this popped into my head. Um, Jumping from a plane.
Yeah, it's
I think
good. You never had it and you never want it.
yeah, but there's always gonna be a little fascination there, but I really don't bungee jumping or jumping out of a
Yeah.
plane. Yeah, I really don't wanna do it, but there's always been a little like, "Wow, I bet that would be really cool."
Thornton Wilder, great playwright, said art is confession. Art is the secret told, but art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time. You've laid your cards on the table for over 90 minutes. I'm grateful. I'm not insinuating you haven't already answered this. What's it really all about for you?
Mm. For me, it really is about, creating.
Yeah.
I've said it a million times, but I just love art so much,
Yeah.
and it's about enjoying what I do, and then sharing it with other people, and that is very much about being in the present. And for visual art also, like exploring not having an audience, but really having it just be about creating to create. Letting go of the legacy and just enjoying the now and enjoying the what I can do with the time I have here. And accepting that that's all I can pretend to have control over.
Yeah, you touched on that and you said, these words you put out, the desire, the impulse, and you use the word fierce to create. I'm just curious, how much do you think it's in, again, it's a stupid thing saying more, but is it more the DNA? Because, you're great, it's in your family to be creative, or is it more on your own? How much do you think, is there a difference? Like, do you think there's a little more? It's a question I ask people who live really long. I said, is it more your DNA or more your lifestyle choice? So it does go to your ego, like, well, I've lived a good life. That's why I've lived long. But it could be in their DNA because people can smoke and drink their whole life and live till
Right.
they're 100,
Right.
like UB Blake, great jazz in the Great American Songbook. He played when he was 100 years old and he smoked his whole life. Well, it could have been there weren't pesticides on the tobacco, but you know, I'm just curious with you, knowing you explaining the history of your parents and your family being creative. You think
Mhm.
it's more in your DNA or more on and that impulse or that desire?
For me, I feel it is very much in my DNA. I just
Yeah.
feel like it is coming from, my all different angles. I can trace it through my family, the visual art definitely, but also the singing. Nobody pursued it, but my dad has a beautiful singing voice. His father, who I never met, apparently was one of those like heard a jingle on the TV and could just sit down at the piano and play it perfectly. So he had perfect pitch and amazing ears and a beautiful singing voice. So in that sense, like I feel like that has all come. The impulse though, I mean, I think a lot of people can be gifted that talent, right? They can be we call it talent, but I have problems with that word. But anyway, can be gifted those abilities, right? But then the impulse, right? It's kind of like, did somebody hit the on switch?
Yeah,
Um, and
that's
for
good.
me, that was very much there.
We should do a salon if you're interested someday with a bunch of great jazz vocalists on obsession with legacy and that word you just said, talent.
Right.
That'd be fun. Now
I would
you
love to. I would love
yeah,
to.
let's do it. But especially because you listen to podcasts, you're good at podcasting.
Oh,
You
thank you.
yourself. You're great. But I know you got to get going. But before I wrap up with the last two questions, can you talk jazz singers for a few minutes, or you really got to get going?
Oh, no, I can talk. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
you
Mhm.
sure?
We're
Okay.
doing well. Yeah, yeah. We
I'm
have
I'm
plenty of time.
curious. I'm curious. I've really delved deep into jazz vocalists for years, the only one we really you mentioned was Ella. And I'm just curious, who are some of your touchstones besides just jazz genre? Who are the people that, I hate to say influence, but just had an impact on you, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Um, hmm.
and current or old, or again, just being that American songbook, we could go off into the lyricist alone. I mean, that's like,
Oh, I
we
know.
are so fortunate. My big thing is my sister brought home Led Zeppelin 2, and I listened to it, and it changed my life. And it was like, my friend goes, "That's the blues." So I learned it backwards. I goes, but I didn't realize that I was actually hearing the blues because my parents were playing American musicals around my house, and I was learning jazz. And growing up in the 60s, we heard gospel on pop radio. Oh, happy day. We heard reggae, Israelites, by Desmond Decker. They didn't call it reggae, and they didn't call it, they just called it, you're listening to radio. So
Right.
we had this genre, expansive genre thing going. So I'm just curious, maybe even just, you talked about the genre you gravitate toward, Great American Songbook, but any, lyricist or vocalist besides
Oh,
that you had,
yeah, absolutely. I was obsessed with the Beatles and, continue to be. I just adore them. The versatility of what they did. I love the singing, I love the harmonies, I love the songs. Um, it was still in a it was CDs, and
yeah,
when I started listening to them, iTunes was very, very preliminary. So
yeah,
I was gifted an album a birthday or a Christmas. So I would consume it at a like, okay, I got Abbey Road, and I would just listen to that on
yeah,
repeat until the next thing came along. From there, I listened to The Doors.
yeah,
I really enjoyed The Doors. I was also a kid of the '90s, so I loved Britney Spears. Uh,
yeah,
I loved the Spice Girls. Um, I What else did I listen to? Weirdly, this album of You've Got Mail, the movie, the soundtrack, my mom had it, and I loved that soundtrack. Um, and we had that on tape, so I listened to that on tape. Um, but my mom had eclectic taste. I mean, we had a lot of different music around. I always and continue to love funk and soul. I mean, I think it is the
yeah,
of all music, it is the music. I mean, it makes people feel good, it makes you wanna dance, it's soulful, it's exciting. You
yeah.
know, it seems like, oh, they're just singing the same lyric over and over again, and yet it's so masterful that I think, especially Black American music, there is just this connection. Talk about flow state, right? There's this connection to something just greater, right? They are just these vessels of magic, and so I love, 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 love that music. Um,
I
yeah.
agree with you there because funky, the word funky, and I always say that's my favorite genre too, is funk, is fun is the key. Having fun is the key, But having grown up with Motown and then all the 60s, you know, Isley Brothers, It's Your Thing, and then just graduating to P-Funk and James Brown and Sly Stone, it's like, whoa, that's enough right there. But then when you hear Smokey Robinson sing, you're like, Tears of a Clown, it's like, uh-oh, you know. That was beautiful. You really covered it. But then other jazz vocalists,
Yeah.
because
So, oh my goodness, I have so
then
many.
you graduated to jazz. I mean, there's so many, but I'm curious besides Ella.
Yeah. So, my biggest influence now is, Carmen McRae.
Yeah.
I
Good.
adore her singing. I adore her storytelling. It translates through recordings. I love how she improvises. I love that she also could accompany herself, even though, she notably chose not to most of the time. She really knew what she wanted. Um, I love, Sarah Vaughan, I have a complicated relationship with.
Yeah,
She's another one where there's this album called After Hours. It's a trio album,
yeah,
um, with Mondell Lowe on guitar, and I sadly forget the bassist's name, but it is I mean, that album, eh, I get lost in it I've listened to it so many times, and I get lost in it every time, and it is her at her best, and when she is good, she is so good.
yeah.
Um,
Well,
and
it's
what she does.
interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah,
go ahead.
you did this trio. It's like post Billie Holiday. It's Ella, Sarah, and Carmen. And Carmen's the less really. And then my wife Susie has the same difficulty with Sarah, but she's totally Ella'd out. And it is interesting how you found that niche that you mentioned Carmen before Sarah. That was like cool because it's just finding the like the little subtleties in these people and how much you can like it's like what Janis Joplin said about Bessie Smith. It's like she gave us the air and told us how to breathe it.
Mm.
Really literally they can tell you how to breathe the air if you listen to it because that's sort of the process.
Yeah, well, and I love, when you listen to somebody a lot, there's this weird osmosis that happens. You're not intending to, but all of a sudden, some of the phrasing you have and some of how you sing just starts to change. Um,
Yeah.
and a big influence on me too has always been, well, not always, but more recently been Mel Tormey.
Oh, you're
Um,
smart there.
I love Mel Tormey. I love how he phrases, I love how he tells stories. He was a writer, writing songs, writing books. I mean, there's a deepness to him that you really feel. And, that kind of lifelong involvement in the music that is pretty incomparable. I mean, he was invited up to sing with a band at 4 and his career started. So, he just was always, always in it. Um,
You
but
know,
of
you know
of the
your
crooners.
Yeah, you know your stuff if you mention Mel. Our friend was Mel's best friend, and if you really break down scat singing, it's just Mel and Ella. Everybody else
Absolutely.
is good, but I study King Pleasure and John Hendricks and all the great scat singers. I love them all, but when it comes down to it, those two are pretty much the pinnacle, and it's pretty interesting because Mel gets chalked off as that's like corny, but you got nope. There's a lot to it.
No.
It's
Oh,
let's like Bing
so good.
Crosby too. Bing Crosby's actually a great singer, and then you go right to the source and you go Louis Armstrong. Like someone in the 5 Allen Watts says, "I said who started it all," and the guy goes Louis Armstrong. But I loved your answer, the sun. That was good. Well, we could talk this forever because we gotta hook you up with my wife Susie Williams and talk jazz. And there's like so many New York people I want to ask you. Do you know? Do you know? How
Yeah,
about that?
yeah.
But let's wrap it up with these last two questions, and then hopefully we can continue um, talking forever and ever.
Yes, I
Um,
would love that. I love talking jazz, so really,
yeah,
that sounds wonderful, especially with other vocalists, it's just so much fun
yeah,
'cause, we don't get to meet. We're not meeting on gigs. Jazz
yeah,
vocalists,
yeah.
like bass players, I imagine too. I mean, they see each other at jam sessions.
Yep, that's it. And proud to say Susie opened for Manhattan Transfer at Carnegie Hall and blew him off the stage, according to the New York Times.
Wow.
So, but
Amazing.
she's struggled her whole career, and she still loves it, and that's the beauty. You just keep doing it. You just love playing, making music. What's the cultural shift you see developing today that inspires you?
To me, it is what I love is that I've seen specifically in the Gen Z.
Yeah,
My friend told me this great story, and it really stuck with me. She's a dancer, and they had a dance rehearsal, and the dancers, she's a choreographer, and the dancers who were involved, they went through everything. They took a little break, and they said, they kind of got together amongst themselves and then came back to the director and the choreographer, and they said, "Hey, listen, we're all really tired. We feel that with the rehearsal we've done, we feel confident for today that we've done what we needed to do, and we would like to end." And the fact that they not only had, like, discussed this among themselves about their boundaries and recognized it and then asked, to me and to my friend, it's like, "Oh, I would have just pushed through beyond my limits to complete exhaustion to satisfy whatever they wanted." And the fact that this group didn't do that, it gives me so much hope. Again, I'm an optimist, right? So I'm just like, "Yes, the next generation." I'm so excited to hear that. I also am really excited by their ability to teach themselves things through the internet. The way
Yeah,
that they are thinking and discerning information at a much younger age and processing and it's like dad said this, but I'm going to look it up online and see what other people think. That is so, so cool. And it has the power, of course, to lead you down dark paths as well. But hopefully, with all of this inundation of information, you're starting to sort through sources on your own and and determine things differently. So that makes me really excited.
that was really beautiful. And it is like, so what? You develop critical thinking skills then. If you're overloaded and it's like, oh my God, blah, 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 blah. It's like, no, it's just a challenge to how you're going to deal with it, how you're going to cope with it. So you've answered this a billion times, but there's the word most in it. Last question. What gives you the most optimism?
Mm. Oh, what gives me the most optimism? At the moment, my nephew.
Yeah. It's
I don't have kids yet. I'd like to have kids. It's something I'm thinking about. And yeah, seeing future generations and
yeah,
that's really exciting to me. Is like, wow, this journey continues on for them and what are they going to do? What are we going to do with this world and what are they going to do? And that it makes me excited. It's like, what he's learning, how he's engaging with the world, the joy he has in discovering it. It's like, wow, yeah, this is so cool. You become so kind of tuned out necessarily, right? To be that engaged and on all the time like a kid is it's just exhausting. But to see that is like, wow, okay. Yeah, we have that curiosity. That's just innate. That's just there. And that gives me a lot of optimism and a lot of joy and a lot of hope. So,
it's really beautiful. It's really what most people say is what gives you the most optimism. They say youth, younger
mhm.
people. And it's really beautiful. And it's funny because the first question is, what's the best thing for a human being? And I learned that from someone who studied Wilhelm Reich, and they said, other people. And then the last question is, what gives you the most optimism? This is the question they asked Groucho Marx at the end of his life. And he says, other people. So it's like great spending time with other people here on this podcast, especially with you, Cait. You are super cool, man. I want to hang out with
Thanks.
you.
Oh, man. Well, likewise, amazing questions. I mean, my brain is just like, "Whoa, that was so cool."
And
So
we
fun
got
to
to
talk about.
thank Flash for introducing us. So I'm going to hit the stop button, but I don't want this to ever stop. So stay in touch, Cait. What a joy.
Okay. Yeah, likewise. Thank you so much. I look forward to more conversations.
Super cool. Thanks again.
Bye.